In this video, I traveled to the mountains of Northeast Tennessee to the oldest town in the state, Jonesborough. While there, we will get some local history from my friend, Native and Vice-Mayor Adam Dickson. Sit back and enjoy. All right, folks, so I am here in Jonesborough, Tennessee, which is Washington County. It's in the northeastern section of Tennessee. I'm from Middle Tennessee, and I'm here with my good friend, Adam Dickson, who is the Vice Mayor here. And we are in the right in front of the Washington County Courthouse. As you see right over here, Washington District 1776, the first governmental division ever named in honor of George Washington, Washington County. Jonesborough was established by North Carolina, by the NC Act. Is that North Carolina Act?
It was.
North Carolina Act of 1779, laid out in 1780, and was the capital of Franklin. And a lot of people don't necessarily know what that means. Can you tell us what the capital of Franklin means?
Yeah, so North Carolina, back in these days, 1770s to 1780s, would have gone from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River. And so there were folks that had crossed over the mountain and had settled in this area, and they wanted to form their own state. And they really liked the person Benjamin Franklin and who he was and what he stood for. And they wanted to form a state, probably would have named it Franklinton. And so they actually petitioned Benjamin Franklin at one point in time to have their own state. And Mr. Franklin decided not to get in the squabble. Those citizens actually took up arms and actually wanted this territory to be the state of Franklin. And Jonesborough was already established and was already seen as, again, part of the North Carolina Act. But these folks wanted Jonesborough to be the center for their newly found state. And there was actually an armed squabble, and lasted for about a month. But ultimately, North Carolina militia would come over the mountain, take care of business, and would reestablish this area as part of North Carolina. 1796, the state of Tennessee was formed.
Okay, 1796. And so we're here in front of the courthouse. Now, this isn't the original courthouse.
No.
This is a later edition of the courthouse. And Adam, what I think is very interesting about you and what we've talked about is that your family has long-standing ties to this specific area.
Yeah.
And can you go into detail with the research that you've done, which one is very cool about a Buffalo Soldier, but we'll get to that with this episode. But can you kind of take us back to what you understand to be your history and your connections here in Jonesborough, Tennessee?
So surely. So from what little I know, Dr. Joseph Ray will immigrate from Ireland and will find his way to Jonesborough, Tennessee, back around the 1830s. He will buy a piece of property here on the, on the northeast side of town, and he'll buy a farm. He'll have a slave, Jenny, and she will give birth to twins, John and Alfred Ray, his sons. And so Alfred will become the Buffalo Soldier.
Okay.
John becomes a stonemason. And John will have about 7 or 8 children, one of which would be Catherine Ray, my grandmother, and she would meet her future husband, Larkin Dickson, at the Warner Institute, which is a school for free slaves. And they would meet at the Warner Institute. They will have 3 children, and the baby would be Fred Dickson. And Fred and my mother, Evelyn, meet, and I come in the world.
There you go.
So yeah, we have roots here, and but that's essentially the story.
Yeah. And Fred's not necessarily a bad name, y'all.
I tell you, my dad loved the name Fred.
I love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
And would get mad if you called him Frederick. No, don't call him Frederick. No, he's Fred.
He's Fred.
Can
you give us some significant things that have transpired historically here at the Washington County Courthouse?
So there, as you can see here, you've got this kind of public space where you can have all kinds of events, and we currently do a weekly concert here.
Okay. Does it last all the way through the winter?
The summer.
Oh, just summer.
Folks will sit out here in the street, and then we'll have different groups here: jazz groups, country, old time. But we also have had Klan rallies here back in the 80s and such. So we have dealt with that here in Tennessee's oldest town. Jonesborough is a slightly unique place, and I know we'll get probably into that, but as you, of course, if you can imagine, late 20th century, seeing that history of race and racism, it's always been interesting to see when some folks would want to push it, there would be other folks that would want to condemn it and criticize it.
Sure.
And so we've had that here in small town America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, being that this is Tennessee's oldest town, obviously from a historical perspective, there's a lot of good historical buildings that are here that we're going to look at.
Yeah.
And so this would be Main Street right here, right?
Right.
Do you know the age of some of these buildings? I know some down there, which we'll go to, where they have historical markers, so we'll be able to identify those. But for this row right here, what are you thinking?
So the roots of probably most of these buildings are going to go as far back as maybe the early 1800s. We know that this section, if you look at that house there where if you can see the porch, that section down to the end of the street, that section is going to be about the 1790s.
Okay.
We're going to go by and if we ever get to that house, you can see it. It's more of like a Federalist style architecture.
Okay.
When you get down to the corner, if you look up and you see the roof of that building, you see that kind of stair step there.
Yep.
That's more Dutch architecture.
Okay.
And so we know that was kind of prevalent, 1790s and such. And then this section right up here would be more of the 1800s.
Yep, this section right here.
Right.
And so when we talk about the Civil War, obviously this area potentially wasn't as affected as other places, would you say? Because, so many towns had burned down, right?
So this area, if you just talk about the effect of the Civil War, this area certainly was affected. But now, in terms of burning down properties, no, this space survived.
Okay.
Now, actually, back behind the courthouse, back in the early 1920s, there was a tannery, and so the tannery caught fire, and this whole section of buildings came down.
Oh, wow.
So when you look at this section of Jonesborough, you're going to see more slightly modern architecture from this corner up because of the fire that took place in Jonesborough.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Well, let's head on down.
Surely.
So one of the interesting things to me, and tonight I'm actually here screening one of my films, which is called The Indelible Appalachians, is that the International Storytelling Center is located right here in Jonesborough, Tennessee. Adam, because you grew up here, do you remember when the plans were put in place for the Storytelling Center to come here? And how it all came about?
Oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do. So for years, this spot right here had some significance. There used to be a hotel here called the Andrew Johnson Tavern. And it was a big, beautiful structure, and back in the 30s and 40s, it was kind of the place, the Andrew Johnson Tavern. It caught fire and was never rebuilt. So then on this space, there was a grocery store and a hardware store.
Okay. And
it was here for years. And then those places closed. And so then the founder of the International Storytelling Center, Jimmy Neal Smith, who grew up in this area, was a teacher, and he was a big fan of Jerry Clower, which probably your audience won't remember, but Jerry Clower was a noted storyteller and a really funny fella, humorist from Yazoo City, Mississippi. And anyway, Mr. Smith was a fan of Jerry Clower and really thought that there was a way to monetize the idea of telling stories. Come to find out, there was a fella right over the mountain, a real tall, lanky fella. Ray Hicks was his name. And Ray Hicks, Jerry Clower, another fella, not Doc Watson, but I can't think of...
Doc Watson's over in Boone.
Yeah, I can't think of Doc McConnell.
Okay.
Doc McConnell. There were a few other storytellers, Jackie Torrance, who was an African-American woman, and they would come to Jonesborough and be part of the National Storytelling Festival. So Jimmy Neal Smith had this idea, And now, I guess now we're celebrating our 52nd year of the National Storytelling Festival. And then he had this vision of actually having a space that would be kind of the hub for storytelling. And Mr. Smith was also one time the mayor of Jonesborough, so knew all the different grants and whatnot. And as a result of that planning, I guess it may have been maybe 5 to 7 years, we saw the International Storytelling Center.
And so this is the older part of town, right here, right?
It most certainly is.
Chester Inn State Historic Site. This is a pretty large structure, and to my understanding, Andrew Jackson and some other presidents had also visited this site. So what history can you give us about the Chester Inn?
So Chester Inn would have been named after Dr. Chester. He built the place, and this was the more upscale space and for Jonesborough. So Jonesborough used to be part of what was called the Great Stage Road. And so if you think about Interstate 81, pre-interstate, that stretch would have at one time would have comprised what was called the Great Stage Road, and Jonesborough was part of the Great Stage Road. So you would have had all different types of people of different economic levels traveling by stagecoach, and they would have come through Jonesborough, and if they were of means, they would have wanted a place to stay, and the Chester Inn catered to them. And so that's the history here of this space. The library used to be down here in the basement of the Chester Inn, and now it is a historical museum that focuses on Jonesborough and its history. And this would have been the space for lodging in town. And as you said, Andrew Jackson, as a young attorney, actually stayed at the Jackson Inn. Or excuse me, at the Chester Inn. About the early 2000s, there was a sentiment on the part of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen in Jonesborough to acquire this space and to bring back this particular space, bring back the local theater. And so just literally last night we had a VIP party. Tonight there will be a ribbon cutting, and the Jackson Theater will come back alive, showing old movies and having different artists come and perform. And so we're hoping that it can be another community building space.
Absolutely. That's good stuff, man. The arts tend to do that, bring people together.
It's the truth.
Absolutely. And so the Jonesborough Presbyterian Church, I did some research here prior to coming here to film you, and slave galleries have always been interesting to me. And if anybody doesn't know what a slave gallery is, it's where the enslaved individuals had to sit in the churches, and it was usually up top. And this church still maintains the original enslaved gallery. And again, when we say enslaved gallery, that's not a place where where it's art. It's a place where you sit. And so, can you tell us about this church as well as the enslaved gallery?
So the Presbyterian Church still has the slave gallows, and so that's the space. And of course, this is pre-Civil War. Black and white would have worshiped together, and like you said, there would have been a segregated space to worship. And then Civil War comes about. There will be a split in this particular church. Those that were pro-Union would leave this church. Those that were pro-Confederacy stayed here. And so after the war, there will be a reunification, if you will, but that space is still here. And at one time, all three of our churches, there's a Presbyterian church, a Methodist church, and a Baptist church. At one time, all three churches had an area for slaves. Yes. Now,
where did the folks who were okay with the Union side, what church did they break off and go to?
So they actually built a church down the street here on the corner of Fox and Main.
Okay.
And again, once they reunified, they sold that property. Now that church is affiliated with the Disciples of Christ.
Okay.
And so they're down the street there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And some very interesting history about Jonesborough is that it's so eclectic as it relates to its history, because there's also some Underground Railroad history here as well. And a lot of people tend to forget that, for one, the Underground Railroad first ran south to Spanish Florida. And I don't think people necessarily think that the Underground Railroad are in places like Tennessee, North Carolina, and South Carolina and things like that. But you got to think about it. If a person's on the run, they got to leave, for one, the state in which they're in from a safe space to get to where it is that they're going. And so there were abolition publications that were here in Jonesborough, Tennessee. And so this is one of the historical markers for it. And I think it's just really dope that they have it here. But Adam, the Underground Railroad, state of Tennessee, is not talked about often. You being a native here, was that something that was taught growing up? And how proud are you that the city of Jonesborough is making sure to acknowledge as much eclectic history as possible?
So growing up here in town, it was not taught formally. I'm so grateful that there were people that I remember as a little boy who were much older that wanted me to know this history, and I chose to listen. And so I'm very proud of the fact that that we have this story in Tennessee's oldest town. I think there's a whole lot more we could do to share this story. I feel like sometimes we're not as proud of our story as we should be.
Yeah.
And for some people, talking about just the term slavery, they get a little tense.
Yeah.
But I think there's a need for us to acknowledge truth. But we also ought to talk about the fact that there were individuals like Elihu Embry who wanted to right the wrong through publication. Now, you got to tell the whole story, though. Elihu Embry owned a slave.
Yeah, I was about to say he also was an enslaver too.
So by no means are we sugarcoating when we tell the truth. But we need to tell the truth.
Yeah.
And so he did own a slave, Nancy. And so here lately, I guess maybe the past 3 to 5 years, we've had a playwright here in Jonesborough who works for the town of Jonesborough, and she actually produced a play entitled Nancy. Wow. And she talks about this period from Nancy's perspective. And we know bits and pieces based on different data that has been accumulated, paperwork that Mr. Embry would keep related to Nancy.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
And so it just leads me to wonder, just with these other buildings, and if you can look around, it's a pretty cool town, especially that so many things, so many buildings are preserved. Which one of these buildings was used from the standpoint of the Underground Railroad? You know what I'm saying?
I do.
Like, that will always, you know what I'm saying?
I do.
Will always rent space in my head.
Thanks for tuning in to the first video with Adam in Jonesborough, Tennessee. Make sure to set your notifications for part 2, where we talk about Buffalo Soldiers, the Warning Institute, and the local cemetery. If you enjoyed, please make sure to subscribe and share.